Hey guys, for this list I'm going to be going over the villains of Family Guy and rank my top 10 personal favorites. If you enjoy the video, feel free to give it a like and subscribe, and if you would like to send me ideas and suggestions for future videos, feel free to join our Discord. Our Discord will be in a pinned comment and in the description down below. With all that out of the way, let's begin. Number 10. Sonia. Sonia is the villain in Season 12, Episode 3, titled Quagmire's Quagmire. In the episode, Sonia meets Quagmire after he's trying to get his laptop repaired. Quagmire destroyed his laptop after he was trying to get pictures of his cat put on the internet. While talking with Sonia, she figures out it wasn't because Quagmire was trying to put pictures of his cat on the internet that caused his computer to crash. It was actually because of the explicit adult websites that Quagmire was going to. What follows after this is Quagmire and Sonia bonding over their love of explicit content. Quagmire and Sonia end up going on a date, and during the date, Sonia tells Quagmire about her sexual experiences, and Quagmire loves this because he likes being pushed to his limits. Anyways, Sonia ends up drugging Quagmire and having sex with him, which makes him fall in love with her. After Quagmire finds this out, he falls in love with her instantly. He even changes his relationship status almost immediately afterwards. After this, what follows is Sonia and Quagmire pushing each other to their sexual limits, but Sonia ends up taking things too far. Sonia ends up pushing Quagmire to have intercourse with his father. But the scene that is shown next is Quagmire leaving the hotel incredibly angry. After this though, Quagmire shows up to the drunken clam with sunglasses and 2 black eyes. Quagmire ends up communicating on a piece of paper that he is bugged and that Sonia is listening to every conversation they have. When Quagmire leaves the bar, Sonia ends up assaulting him and kidnapping him. Fortunately though, with the help of Ida, Peter, and Joe, they end up finding where Sonia is holding Quagmire. It turns out Sonia is keeping Quagmire held up in a storage unit. Sonia and Joe end up confronting each other after Sonia took Joe's gun, and afterwards it is revealed that Joe had a mental breakdown and he doesn't put bullets in his guns anymore. After this, Sonia was taken to prison and she has never been seen again. Also, on a side note, I thought I would include the fact that Sonia was voiced by Seth MacFarlane's sister, Rachel McFarlane. When it comes to Sonia though, she's truly an evil character, and anyone who can push Quagmire past his sexual limits truly has no boundaries. Number 9. Lana Lockheart. Lana Lockheart, also known as Mrs. Lockhart, was Chris's replacement teacher when Brian got removed from Chris's class. This was back when Chris was still going to Buddy Cincinnati Junior High School. When Chris sees Mrs. Lockhart, he immediately falls for her. Chris ends up taking some advice from his parents, where he comes to the conclusion he needs to do something spontaneous and unexpected. So Chris shows up to school as a naked astronaut, where afterwards Mrs. Lockhart tells him that he shouldn't be so impulsive. After this, when the Griffins are having a family dinner, Lois and Peter are shocked to discover that Chris has a crush on his teacher. However, after this, Peter and Lois set up a meeting, and I'm sure Peter can see why Chris liked Mrs. Lockhart, because Peter couldn't help himself, and he decided to ask for a picture of Mrs. Lockhart to put on the back of Lois's head. After this, Mrs. Lockhart tries to take advantage of Chris by telling him that she feels the same way, but if they want to be together, Chris has to kill her husband. Chris ends up trying to change the offer, but Mrs. Lockhart doesn't accept it, so she decides to kill her husband herself by getting him mauled by a bear. Mrs. Lockhart is last seen at the end of the episode with the bear in the motel, and it's shown that the two of them aren't getting along very well. Something interesting I thought I would add though is that Mrs. Lockhart is voiced by Drew Barrymore, who went off to voice Jillian. Overall, Mrs. Lockhart made this list because her episode is very memorable, and she has really funny jokes, along with Mrs. Lockhart playing into every teenage boy's fantasy, while also being every teenager's worst nightmare at the same time. Number 8. Evil Stewie. Evil Stewie first appeared in Season 9, Episode 12, titled The Hand That Rocks the Wheelchair. In the episode, Stewie ends up cloning himself, and when he does so, he makes Evil Stewie, which is pretty much the pure embodiment of evil. He is identical to Stewie, besides the fact that his colors on his clothes are reversed. You know, you would think that Stewie would remember that cloning hasn't exactly gone well for him. We had seen this before with Bitch Brian and with Bitch Stewie, but of course he still does the experiment anyways, and when Evil Stewie was brought into the world, he ends up cutting off Brian's tail and attempting to choke Stewie with it. Also, it should be noted that Evil Stewie is even more brutal in the DVD versions. There is a cut scene where he slices a woman in half and lures the Kool-Aid Man to attempt to kill him. As the episode goes on, Stewie and Brian team up to defeat Evil Stewie. The two of them end up luring him out by having Brian say that he can't take living anymore, and he asks Evil Stewie to end his life. Without even an ounce of empathy, Evil Stewie is delighted over the thought of killing Brian, and then normal Stewie appears and the two Stewies end up fighting. Of course, this turns into a Family Guy moment where they reference the movie Face Off, which has been done multiple times across the series, and Brian ends up having them look at their toes before making a decision on which Stewie to shoot. Anyways, after one of the Stewies is confused by the question, Brian takes the shot, but the episode ends with the audience knowing that the normal Stewie was the one that got shot. Honestly, when I think about everything, overall, Evil Stewie is a force to be reckoned with, and I enjoyed him more than Repeat, who was pretty much the exact same character as Evil Stewie. Also, the only reason I put Evil Stewie so low on this list is because of his lack of dialogue, but I will say the fact that he doesn't talk too much adds a layer to how evil he is. He is a character that doesn't need much of a reason to participate in heinous acts. Number 7. Big Fat Paulie. Big Fat Paulie was a character who was introduced in Season 2, Episode 16, titled, There's Something About Paulie. In the episode, Peter ends up buying a crappy car, but he ends up getting the car taken care of through a favor with the mob. But later he ends up in a situation where he is confronted by the mob, and they tell him that he has to repay his favor to the Don. The favor the Don asks of Peter is to entertain Big Fat Paulie because he is in town for his daughter's wedding. The only problem with this, though, is that Big Fat Paulie is supposedly so disgusting, no one can last more than a minute with him. Peter meets with Big Fat Paulie, and upon meeting him, Big Fat Paulie spits a loogie, then he pours milk in Peter's pants, and then he shoots his gun off in a movie theater. Then, after the movie, Big Fat Paulie pressures Peter into inviting him over to his house for dinner, and what follows is Lois being uncomfortable with him and telling Peter in private that Big Fat Paulie has to leave their family's lives and never return. Peter tells him this, and he ends up putting a hit out on Lois. Peter catches this in time, but when Big Fat Paulie goes to call off the hit, he ends up being shot down and killed, and the rest of the episode plays out. Anyways, the reason I put Big Fat Paulie on this list is despite the fact that he was a short-lived character, he was pretty memorable, and I like his almost childlike persona he had, even though he was extremely dangerous. On top of that, he did attempt to call off the hit before his death, and Peter even remembers him later in the episode Coma Guy, when he is thinking about the deceased characters. Number 6. Penelope. Penelope was introduced in Season 10, Episode 19, titled Mr. and Mrs. Stewie. In the episode, Brian takes Stewie to a park to help make up for the fact that Stewie was having to wait for Brian while he was hooking up with a college student. While Stewie is at the park, he gets pushed down by another kid, and Penelope ends up punishing the kid by having him choke on a piece of gum. What follows is Stewie and Penelope spending time together, and she ends up having a lot in common with Stewie, and she even shows him her evil lair. But after she shows him his evil lair, we find out that she killed her mother, and she pushed Stewie back into his evil ways and his old behavior like in previous seasons. Penelope and Stewie set off bombs across the world, and Brian catches on to the fact that she is a bad influence on him, and he says that they shouldn't spend any more time together. When Stewie ends up relaying this to Penelope, she gets angry, and she makes Stewie swear that he will kill Brian, but Stewie is unable to do the job. After Penelope finds this out, her and Stewie end up getting into a battle using both of their weaponry, and ultimately Stewie is able to win the battle. This is until Penelope gives Stewie a kiss and uses him being distracted to get away from him. Overall, Penelope is evil, but very memorable, and she gave us a bit of an insight into how much Stewie has changed. Number 5. James Woods. James Woods is one of Family Guy's few reoccurring villains. James Woods is incredibly famous in the Family Guy universe, and the school that Chris and Meg go to is even named James Woods High. James Woods' first appearance was in Season 4, Episode 11, titled Peter Got Woods, and in the episode, Peter replaces Brian with James Woods after Brian started dating a girl named Shauna Parks. But James Woods ended up becoming very clingy, and it really creeps Peter out. Things end up not working out between Brian and Shauna, so after this, Brian broke up with Shauna, which caused Peter and Brian to resume their friendship. Of course, the main issue is the fact that James Woods won't let Peter go, so Peter and Brian decide to trap him in a wooden box and ship him away. But this wouldn't be the last time we see James Woods. Later, in season 6, episode 9, titled Back in the Woods, James Woods comes back and performs a complete identity theft on Peter. Pretty much, in the episode, James got a hold of Peter's wallet, which contained his driver's license, social security number, passport, and the title to his house. Brian ends up insisting to Peter to take James Woods' identity, and he ends up destroying James Woods' career by starring in a movie titled September 11th, 2000 Fun. James Woods ends up being extremely angry about this, and before you know it, James is confronted by Peter and Brian once again, where they put him in a wooden box and send him off to top men. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, he is a reoccurring villain, and this wouldn't be the last time we see him. James Woods returns again in season 8, episode 15, titled House of Pain, where he takes a great script Brian had written called What I Learned on Jefferson Street and turns it into a watered-down sitcom called Class Holes. Pretty much, he ends up destroying the project, and everybody who watched the pilot ends up extremely disappointed in Brian. Finally, James Woods' last notable appearance was in And Then They Were Fewer, where he was the first person to die in the episode. He changed his mentality of being toxic, and he wanted to undo the evil things that he had done by becoming a born-again Christian. James Woods tried to make things right again by inviting all the people that he had done wrong to his house, but everything didn't work out in the end. Even after this episode though, he does still have a few cameos, and he is even featured alongside his Simpsons counterpart in the Family Guy Simpsons crossover episode titled The Simpsons Guy. The main reason I wanted to include James Woods on this list though is because he is one of the few reoccurring villains in Family Guy. Most Family Guy villains are gone within the first episode they are introduced, but James Woods is an exception to this, and for that alone, I think that is a justifiable reason for why he makes this list. Number 4. Alana. This character is actually our most recent Family Guy villain. Alana is from Family Guy's most recent episode, Season 20, Episode 7, titled All About Alana. In the episode, we start off with a scene from the future, showing her and Peter's wedding. What follows is a flashback showing us how the episode got to this point. We are shown that Alana is one of Lois's piano students, which is nice because we haven't seen Lois teach piano lessons in a really long time. Lois ends up feeling bad for Alana because she is talented but she has no money, so Lois offers for Alana to stay with the Griffins until she can get back on her feet. While Alana is at the Griffins, she ends up cooking, cleaning, and doing all of Lois's chores around the house. Lois is initially happy at first because Alana is a huge help, but Alana has ulterior motives. She quickly ends up trying to take over Lois's life, and she wins the family over by making them like her more than Lois. Alana even goes as far as trying to seduce Peter, but Peter doesn't have any interest in Alana, so she ends up cooking for him instead. Eventually, Lois confesses to Brian that she's starting to worry about Alana, and when Alana tries to win Brian over, Brian confronts her briefly before she manages to win him over too. On a side note, I really liked how protective Brian got of Lois in this scene. I also really enjoyed the Loving You musical Brian and Alana did. I'm just gonna be honest though, this video might have been an excuse just to talk about this episode and how good it was. Lois ends up seeing Brian and Alana sing 19 musical numbers together, and at that point, Lois realizes that now that nobody has her back, she has to take things into her own hands. Lois starts being passive-aggressive to Alana and decided to pay her out so that she could leave the next day. However, Alana decided to take the money and have a hit put out on Lois so that she could take her place in the Griffin family. Before Lois goes missing, we're shown that Alana and Peter cut out the pictures of Lois and Peter out of their wedding photos. Also, Alana dyed her hair to look like Lois's hair, but she claimed it was because she was such a huge Kathy Griffin fan. Anyways, Lois ends up being captured by the people that Lana had paid off off, and she is thrown off the side of a road. Alana also left a note saying that Lois ran off to become a lesbian. What follows, though, is a really heartwarming scene where Peter mourns Lois and says that she is irreplaceable, but of course this cuts immediately to him in the church marrying Alana. When Lois was thrown off the side of the road, she ends up falling through the church and she stops the marriage. What follows is Joe arresting Alana as the song Jumper by Third Eye Blind plays. I'm not gonna lie, this is one of my favorite endings to a Family Guy episode we had in a really long time. Overall, Alana is very good at being able to follow through with her plans, and she gets brownie points for being in a very good episode. Number 3. Ernie the Giant Chicken. Ernie is a reoccurring villain that has been around since Season 2, Episode 3, titled Da Boom. In the episode, Peter is given an expired coupon by Ernie the Giant Chicken, and this leads into one of Family Guy's famous chicken fights. Pretty much, this conflict forms a rivalry between Peter and Ernie, and they automatically start fighting as soon as they come across each other from that point onward. I think one thing that is worth noting, though, is that the writing staff knows the rivalry between the two of them goes deep in Family Guy, because later in Season 8, Episode 20, titled Something 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 Dark Side, they decided to include Ernie as Boba Fett to contrast Peter's Han Solo. Anyways, Peter and Ernie's rivalry never seems to have ended, as him and Peter have gotten into fights every time they come across each other at random. In Season 4, Episode 3, Ernie assaults Peter while he is defending Quagmire about being a sex offender, and in Season 5, Episode 16, titled No Chris Left Behind, he attacks Peter, but the two of them stop fighting, as they had forgotten what they were even fighting over. Of course, after the two of them disagree over who is paying a bill at a restaurant Ernie and his wife took Peter to, the two of them resume fighting as normal. Of course, the two of them would continue to fight at random, but later, in Season 19, Episode 10, titled Fecal Matters, we got to see a different side of Ernie the Giant Chicken. In this episode, Peter is working at a hospital as a nurse, where he finds out Ernie is a patient and Peter has to take care of him. We end up getting some more information as we find out that Ernie's wife left him for a bigger chicken. However, as the episode goes on, Peter refuses to take care of Ernie, but ends up caving in as he refuses to let Ernie die because Peter actually enjoys their battles. The main reason I decided to include Ernie on this list is because Ernie is one of Family Guy's few reoccurring villains. On top of that, the chicken fights are memorable, and they display how well Family Guy can look with the right budget. Overall, Ernie is a memorable villain, and his rivalry with Peter is unquestionable, as no matter how many times he gets knocked down, he keeps getting back up and living to fight another day. Number 2. Bertram. Bertram was Stewie's longtime rival and half-brother. He was conceived when Peter accidentally spilled semen at a sperm bank, and he decided to fill the jars himself. Eventually, a gym teacher and her partner decided they wanted to have a baby, so they went to a sperm bank that Peter had previously been to, where he made a mistake and accidentally spilt over the jars of sperm and decided to fill it up himself. After they had been donated Peter's sperm, Bertram was conceived. Bertram made his debut in Season 3, Episode 11, titled Mission Impossible. In this episode, Peter and Lois want to have another baby, after they were inspired by Carol, Lois's sister, going into labor and giving birth to a baby boy. Stewie is upset about this though. Because he is the youngest, he feels like he's being replaced, so he tries everything in his power to prevent Lois and Peter from conceiving another baby. Finally, after all of Stewie's tactics fail, he decides to shrink himself down to kill all of Peter's sperm, except for one who he ends up getting into a fight with. That sperm, of course, was Bertram. The two of them end up bonding over their hatred of Lois, and Stewie opens up to the idea of having a brother, so the two of them end up trying to get Peter and Lois to have sex, but Peter and Lois change their mind about having another baby. Peter ends up going into the bathroom to take care of himself, and Stewie is mad because he thought Peter killed Bertram, but he actually ended up surviving because the twinkle in Peter's eye is anytime Bertram is coming up with an evil scheme. This, of course, ends up making Stewie wary of Bertram because he knows he can be a threat. As we mentioned earlier though, Peter ended up donating his sperm, which led to this mistake leading to Bertram being born. He came back in Season 4, Episode 22, titled Sibling Rivalry. In this episode, Bertram ended up going to a park that Stewie was going to, so the two of them end up fighting over who gets to rule the playground. Bertram ends up temporarily winning the battle by getting Stewie chickenpox, which was against the rules because they agreed no chemical warfare, but Stewie's chickenpox are cured, and he goes back to win the battle against Bertram. Bertram ends up admitting defeat, and we don't see him again until Season 9, Episode 16, titled The Big Bang Theory. In The Big Bang Theory, he tried to erase Stewie from existence by killing Leonardo da Vinci, who was one of Stewie's ancestors. Bertram ends up successfully killing Leonardo da Vinci, so Stewie kills Bertram. It turns out though, that Stewie didn't die because the universe created Stewie so that Stewie could create the universe. Overall though, Bertram was memorable because every episode he appeared in, he had pretty decent stories along with a satisfying death after he had completed his plans. Alright, number 1. Diane Simmons. Diane wasn't always a villain. She was best known for being part of the Quahog Channel 5 news station, but everything changed in Season 9, Episode 1, titled And Then There Were Fewer. In the episode, Tom Tucker gets framed for the death of several characters that had been invited to James Woods' house. However, we don't know the full story until Lois says goodbye to Diane, and she puts together that Diane was actually the killer and not Tom Tucker. Diane ends up pulling out a gun and revealing her backstory to show how the situation had occurred. It all started when she had met James Woods at a press conference. Diane and James Woods had began a secret relationship together, but things started to go south when Diane turned 40. When Diane turned 40, Tom Tucker started pushing the Channel 5 news to replace Diane with a fresh, younger face, and he succeeded. Around the time that Diane got notices that she was going to be replaced, James Woods ended up dumping her. Diane, though, was determined to take down those who had wronged her, and that's when she bumped into a young intern named Priscilla. Priscilla was determined to get into the reporting business, so Diane paid her off to sleep with James Woods. Her plan was successful, as Priscilla ended up luring James Woods into a relationship. With the help of Diane's direction, Priscilla persuaded James Woods into becoming a born-again Christian. After James Woods had become a born-again Christian, he was motivated to undo all the wrongs that he had done to those in the past. He decided to invite all those that he had wronged over to his house for dinner. Priscilla played Diane's part that she needed to, but she had no idea of Diane's true plan. Diane's true plan was to kill James Woods and frame Tom Tucker, but things went horribly wrong. Quagmire's date Stephanie ended up sitting in a chair that James Woods was supposed to sit in, and she ended up being shot instead of him. Then lightning struck and the power went out, and she ended up stabbing James Woods. But she realized there were fingerprints on the knife, so she had to run back and wipe away the fingerprints, but as she did, she was caught by Priscilla. So, Diane decided to cover her tracks by killing Priscilla as well. She then decided to put Priscilla away by hiding her away in Tom's room. But then, as Diane was putting away the knife that she had used to stab Priscilla, she ended up being caught by Muriel Goldman. Diane ends up killing Muriel, and then she regroups with the rest of the Family Guy cast that are still in the house. Peter ends up getting everybody distracted by a picture of Derek holding the Hollywood sign, but as Derek leaves to call 911, Diane ends up killing Derek before he could call the police. Diane ended up planting the golden globe that was used to kill Derek in Tom Tucker's room, and when everybody walked into Tom Tucker's room and they saw the evidence stacked against him, everybody turned on Tom. Everything was going to work out for Diane until Lois had put everything together and realized that Diane was the real killer. When Diane was going to finish Lois off, she had her at the edge of the cliff, but right as she was about to pull the trigger, Stewie ends up saving her life and saying that if anybody is going to take out Lois, it's going to be him. Overall, this episode is very satisfying. My only problem with it though is it kind of has the same issues as Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, where sometimes the information is withheld from the audience, so you can't actually figure out the plot until the very end where everything is revealed. For example, if you compare the scene of Diane slipping into the crowd and to the scenes that were were shown earlier in the episodes, you can't actually find out who the real killer is. With that being said though, it is one of the first times Family Guy had tackled a murder mystery, and I feel like they overall did a very good job, and it is one of the most iconic episodes of the series, and that is why Diane has earned our #1 spot. That being said though, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to give it a like, share, subscribe, and as I said earlier, if you would like to suggest me more episodes and topics I should cover for future videos, feel free to join our Discord. You can also get notifications when I go live on Twitch over there. With that being said though, the next video we are going to release is the Family Guy iceberg. I addressed this in a community post earlier, and I'm kind of just raw recording this right now, but I was originally going to do an animation mistakes video, but the reason I decided not to make it was because as I was writing it and going through the episodes, it was just a very uninteresting video, and I honestly want to provide you guys the best quality content that I can provide, especially with as small of a channel as I am, and it just didn't seem like anything that was interesting, and overall I just don't see myself going back to cover that topic in the future. But seriously though, thank you guys all so much for watching. I can't thank you guys enough for all the support. I hope you guys have been liking the shorts. I know they've been a little controversial in our community because not everybody is a fan of them, but like if I'm going to address you guys personally, it's kind of just a way for me to be able to pump out facts on characters and topics that would not really work in a long style video. So that's kind of the reason I've been making them. But you guys all take care. I will see you in the next video releasing later, the Family Guy iceberg. Have a good one.